is approval of the minutes. Council members Jurinsky or Sundberg, any objection to approving the minutes?
None for me.
Okay, consent items 3A through 3C. Any questions, or are we good to move those forward?
Good to move forward.
Okay, all right, general business. First up is the consent decree monitor's first report. And with that, I'll turn it over to you to guide us through the presentation.
Thank you very much, council member, and other council members on the committee as well. I think everyone knows about the consent decree, so I will not go into the details relative to how it came about. We do have a presentation, and I think Aaron needs to be given control to be able to put it up. Yesterday, we filed with the court our first report. That report covers a period from the day we were hired, which was February 14th, through May 15th of 2022. We produced a report which was circulated to the parties for comments. We got those comments back, and according to our timetable, we published that report last night so that we could talk about it publicly here. The monitor is charged with overseeing the implementation of the reforms set out in the consent decree. And the consent decree obviously is an agreement between the city and the Attorney General with respect to those particular reforms. And our job as the monitor is to make sure that the things that the city has promised to do, in fact, get done. And that is done through a process that we've developed. We call it the methodologies to aid in the determination of compliance. And what we did was meet with the parties and agree on setting the goalposts, if you will, for each of the 70 mandates that come out of the consent decree. In addition to our responsibility of assessment of those 70 mandates, we also provide technical assistance to the city as requested by the city. And our third important function is to communicate with the public. We have done that in a variety of different ways. We held one town hall and have another town hall scheduled for August 9th. We have a website which is available in, I think, more than 80 languages. And by the way, our report will be posted on that website. And we formed what is called the Community Advisory Council. We have 3 co-chairs, Omar Montgomery, Reed Heddick, and Jeanette Rodriguez, who are leading the charge in that regard. Just some highlights from the first reporting period. As with any new project, we spent a lot of time getting to know the players. We met with stakeholders, obviously from the AG's office, from APD, AFR, the city attorney's office, the city manager's office, the Civil Service Commission, the public defender's office, sheriffs, and we presented on one occasion to this committee and have met individually with each of you as well. Interestingly, this consent decree is being run a little bit differently than others that I have been engaged in previously, and that's by design. We have included the unions in this process, both the IAFF and the FOP, and meet with them regularly as well. We also have a once monthly all parties / all stakeholders meetings. in which we discuss concerns that may have come out during the prior month, issues, and talk about where we are in terms of our monitoring. As I mentioned, we established.
Uh-oh.
Uh-oh. I was gonna say, is that just me? No,
Nope.
apparently not. Okay.
No, sir.
All right. See if Jeff can make it back on.
Councilmember, I'll text him and let him know that he's off. He doesn't
Great.
know already.
Thank you. Jeff, are you there?
I just see you again. I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah, you froze up there.
I apologize.
No problem.
Although I promise I had nothing to do with it intentionally. In addition to our first town hall meeting, we conducted a community survey. The results of that survey are included in our report. We published those methodologies to aid in the determination of compliance. In the first reporting period, we examined 36 of the 70 mandates. 9 were in substantial compliance. 8 of those had to do with AFR and their compliance in terms of the agreement not to utilize ketamine as a chemical sedative. So that has continued. We will continue watching that. Of the remaining 29, 9 are on a cautionary track. The major concern there is one of to policy creation, and we're working with the police department on that. And again, that just related to PD, not to AFR. The remaining 20 are in various stages, moving toward compliance. In addition, in our report, there were 3 focus issues, and those focus issues dealt with, number 1, the termination of Chief Wilson. We thank her for her service. She spearheaded and laid the groundwork for our extreme collaboration with the city in this, and I want to emphasize that the city has been cooperative in the extreme, both city management and each of the departments that we are dealing with. We talked about the significant efforts which had been underway well before we got here. The new way, the community relations section, which was set up, the community police task force, the chief's youth advisory team, your Aurora Youth Night. And then we had a separate section, a focus issue on systems to ensure best policing practices. And there are a variety of systems. I won't get into them here, but those systems, in order to make sure that when we leave, and we will leave when there is substantial compliance with all of the mandates of the decree, that these systems are working at peak efficiency in order to make sure that the reforms that have been put in place remain in place. And as part of that, that section of the report, we looked at one particular case in which the systems did not work exactly as we had hoped they would in the beginning. But the good news is that they did work in the end. They dealt with a specific officer and the remediation of issues that he was having. And I'm happy to report that, in fact, those issues, by all accounts, have been remediated. Just on the next slide, this is how the report card looks. This is the legend to the report card. Right track, cautionary track, and wrong track with colored balls, which get filled in according to the degree of progress towards substantial compliance. And then on the report card, when you view the report, you will see that in the next reporting period, there is a gray circle for those mandates, which will be evaluated in that period. And of course, we will be asking each of the departments implicated in that assessment to provide those self-assessments as to where they believe they are. All in all, we are very pleased with the progress that is being made. I think we are on the right path and look forward to making Aurora the model of public safety. So thank you.
Any questions for Jeff? Council members Sundberg or Jurinsky?
Not yet.
Okay. And Jeff, you said, I think I saw the report, the initial report you'd emailed out to us, and I assume will be made public. Is that correct?
Yes, so we will be putting it on our website, and I understand that the city will be putting it on its website as well.
And just to make sure I heard this correctly, so there are areas that are already in substantial compliance or very near substantial compliance, and I assume that that's a result of APD and AFR taking actions even prior to the patterns and practice report coming out to start the reforms necessary in both departments. Is that correct?
Absolutely correct. And the ones that are in substantial compliance deal mostly with AFR relative to ketamine and chemical sedatives, but absolutely those steps were taken beforehand.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Jeff, for the presentation. If there's no further questions, we'll go on to item 4B, the update on the Aurora Action Plan.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks, Jeff.
All right, Councilmember, it's Jason Batchelor. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we've got that written report. We'll kind of just do like we did last time. We'll kind of go through each of the 5 major areas and see if there's any questions. So on the first one, on terms of getting fully staffed, we've got those numbers. And are there any questions in terms of our progress on that?
I have one question, Jason. I've been having conversations both with Chief Oates and recently actually with Jeff and meeting with the consent decree monitor. And one of the recognizing that we need to have a fully staffed department, and that while it seems like our retention issue overall has slowed and that we're losing fewer officers, great progress, it's still the recruitment part of rebuilding our department is taking time. And one of the challenges that it seems to stand out to me is this ability to get laterals from across the country. And what I'd like to understand better is this challenge a civil service challenge, or is it an HR challenge? Or because I've heard conflicting comments on where the challenge of it being more timely in our ability to go to another state and recruit officers and bring them to Aurora.
So I'd say it's a little bit of all the above. So we just this week went to the civil service. By charter, the charter says that if we're going to recruit a lateral, they have to have 3 years of related experience of being a police officer. And so by state statute, they have to have sort of 1 year of police work in order to be post-certified and come in. So then, you have 1 year as a police officer, 2 additional years as related experience. And then within the civil service rules, there was a while back where APD went to the department and then, or went to civil service. And the civil service rules currently say that is 3 years of work as a, in a full service police station, to look at that and perhaps add some additional flexibility so we could beyond that minimum 1 year of police work, within that 2 years, could we look at other experience of related experience? And so Chief Oates has said, things like corrections officers or perhaps military police officer experience. And so we had a very good, productive meeting with the Civil Service Commission, kind of made them aware of the issues. They're looking at it, and they're actually calling a special called meeting next week where we hope to have a revision of that rule. So I'd say that's where kind of the civil service piece of it comes in. And then I'd say the department and the city own the other portion of that, which is we need to do a better job of outreach. And to that end, I think the chief and his team have some plans about how to do much more timely and much more directed recruitment efforts. And so I don't want to speak for the chief. And so Chief Oates, if you want to talk a little about some of those plans, I think that would be a good update for the committee.
Yeah, and I'd like to comment also on the proposed rule change with the Civil Service Commission. The language of the Civil Service Commission rule for laterals is pretty rigid in saying that it has to be 3 years of police experience. That's not required by the charter. We have found, and I have found in my career in all the places that I've worked, that some of my best police officers, their background before they became cops was in corrections and military policing, those kinds of things. So we're basically asking for flexibility with regard to hiring laterals to consider other kinds of related law enforcement work in meeting that 3-year requirement. So we're hopeful we'll get that rule change, and there's a follow-up discussion next week with the commission. Now, with regard to recruiting, we're about to embark on an exciting new initiative. And this is an idea that came forward by our own members. There are areas of the country that don't pay anywhere near as well as we are paying. And especially with our new salary, what we can offer in terms of salary, relocation benefits, et cetera. And so folks in the department came to us and said, the place where I used to work, cops are underpaid compared to us, and there might be a good target area to recruit. So we're taking our first foray later this month, the end of the month, to New York City, where cops are tremendously underpaid. And we're going to try a week of recruiting in New York City and on Long Island, where we would be on the ground. We're going to advertise aggressively in social media. The idea came to us in part from our conversation with another Florida law enforcement agency that did a similar effort in the New York area and got 150 applicants. So the goal is to try New York the end of the month. Other areas we're considering targeting for recruitment on the road is the Atlanta area, where cops are significantly underpaid compared to us. And we're also talking about other areas in the South. Memphis is another target area we're considering. So it's a bit of a leap of faith that this new way of doing business and recruiting for laterals might work. But again, we were advised by a recent large agency in Florida had done this, and they provided us a lot of advice on how to do it and do it well. So we're gonna make an effort, and we'll see if this new way of doing recruiting for laterals has any impact or success. So we're trying to be creative and outside the box thinking.
Yeah, thanks, Chief Oates. I have just two follow-ups, and it could be for you, sir, or for Jason. On the Civil Service Commission rule, the 3-year requirement, is that consistent with AFR?
So the 3-year requirement is, I think, consistent for both AFR and APD. The Civil Service Commission in the charter, the Civil Service Commission, it is not consistent. So AFR has, I think, as the Chief Oates said, APD has interpreted that very directly, that has to be police experience, and we've put a finer point on related experience. And so that there is a bit of a difference there. And again, it was part of the discussion. Again, I think it was a productive discussion with civil service. So we're hopeful that they're going to consider that rule change. And we also had very good discussions around nobody is looking to lower the standards in terms of, we're still going to do full backgrounds. We are going to do psychological testing. We're going to do everything that we do normally. We just want to have, as the chief said, a little more flexibility when it comes to that experience component. But there is a difference right now in terms of AFR and APD. There certainly are, we're much more narrow in terms of what we're considering for experience on APD, and that's part of the basis for the request as it relates to the rule change.
Final question on this is, and this what came up in a conversation I had with Jeff, talking about the consent decree. Is there some sort of limit on the number of laterals we can take?
Essentially, it's 50% in terms of when we're bringing in within a year, and so typically the way we've interpreted that in the past is that if we're running 80 folks through basic academy, that means we can bring up to 80 in as laterals. And so given the size and volume of folks we've run through our academy classes, I think we would probably be eligible to bring in, and the academy classes planned, I think we'd be eligible for at least 50 to 60 laterals. And so I think given the vacancies we've had, if we were extremely successful and got to that number, that would probably get us near full staffing. So not an issue, I think, in the near term, just given the size and volume of basic academies that we've been running. And like I said, that if we were to butt up against that, that's a problem I would love to have, and we will bring that back to council and the Civil Service Commission. But at this point, I don't think it's, it would have to be a significant departure in terms of our past experience. So we've been having, in the single digits or very low double digits in terms of our laterals, and so we'd have to see 300%, 400%, 500% increase in that. And if we do, I still think we have room under the charter at that sort of 50 to 50 at least this year.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions on this topic? Otherwise, I'll have Jason keep going.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I would like to know, can somebody answer, are we required by the charter to have a civil service commission?
We are, yeah. The Civil Service Commission and their duties are laid out in the charter. There are certain aspects that they are clearly laid out in the charter. The way they do it and the process and procedures is, I think, one of the things we're looking at. And speaking bluntly, within the consent decree, that was some of the initial concerns we've heard is, well, you can't change anything. And I think both the Attorney General's office and the consent decree monitor have been very clear. We are going to operate within the charter. We are not going to, at least initially, that will be the recommendations. We think there's enough flexibility administratively to make changes into how we do things without conflicting with the provisions of the charter in terms of the authority and responsibilities of the Civil Service Commission.
So I guess that's my question also. When we talk about civil service reform, if they're saying we can't change any of the rules, Jason, how do you plan to initiate that reform?
So we can change the rules. So again, the rules, so the charter is very specific in terms of certain components of the discipline process, of the promotional process. The charter is very specific. There's other areas, I would say particularly on the entry level hiring, where it actually does not provide a lot of detail. What the charter says is that the Civil Service Commission is responsible for certifying a list of qualified applicants. And that's about all it says. So my interpretation of that is that we have some flexibility working within that charter requirement. And so I think the Civil Service Commission needs to be involved in entry-level hiring, but I don't think we have to continue to do the process that we've done exactly as we've done it. I think that we have flexibility within the charter that the Civil Service Commission can operate in certifying a list of qualified applicants, but doing the process exactly as we've done it for the last several years, I think is absolutely open in discussion. I'm not a lawyer. The Civil Service Commission may take exception to that, but I think that those are the discussions we're having right now. And I think something that I know the monitor team has looked at, and part of their recommendations are going to come down as to how to change this. And they're very familiar with the charter provisions, and their recommendation, I am certain, will comply with the charter requirements.
And do we have any ability to remove Civil Service Commission members and/or add additional more than the 5?
I don't know on the numbers. I'd have to ask one of the lawyers. I do know that there's the ability for the council to remove commission members. I think it requires a vote of 7 or 8. It's more than a simple majority in order to remove a civil service commissioner. But I think there is that ability.
Can I get an exact answer from one of the attorneys, please?
Yeah, Councilmember Jurinsky, there is a supermajority, Pete Schulte, City Attorney's Office. The commissioners serve at the pleasure of council. So if they are not following council's direction, then you are able to take steps to remove them and replace them, because they are serving at your pleasure, right? That they need to push forward the policy decisions that you are expecting. So there is an option for that. We did talk about that. That was when we were presenting the consent decree back in November. That question did come up as well. But as Jason was talking about, just to go back to the charter language, what we do in Aurora is not repeated anywhere else in the state of Colorado. So, and the civil service language is very similar to every other civil service commission and all the big cities that have civil service in Colorado. So the Civil Service Commission has taken one position on what they can do. The city attorney's office under me and our evaluation of the attorney general's office, we think it can go a different way. And as Jason had mentioned, that's kind of the conversation we're having with the consent decree monitor and their expert that they brought in to give those recommendations. But we're hopeful. We're hopeful that when the recommendations do come out from the expert that was hired, that the commission's on board and we can make the changes that'll be good for the city.
Okay, so I need 7 votes to remove a civil service commissioner. And is there the ability to have more than 5 commissioners? Is there the ability to add additional seats on the civil service?
I don't know that off the top of my head. There might be. I will check and get back with you. I have to make sure there's not a number, but that obviously we need an odd number for voting purposes. So I will check into that and get back to you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jurinsky, this is Julie Heckman, Deputy City Attorney. The charter does provide that civil service needs 3 to 5 commissioners. So 5 would be the maximum number.
But when you say 3, we could potentially remove 2 and have a civil service commission of 3 commissioners.
Correct.
And state in the charter.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yes.
Any other questions?
I have a question, Councilmember Zvonek.
Oh yeah, go ahead, sir.
For Chief Oates, with respect to the out-of-state recruiting, the nuts and bolts of that. Do we have recruiters on the ground in those states? Do we have a headhunter making phone calls? Is it social media? How does it work exactly to pull those people in?
Again, this is our first foray, and the idea came to us in part from members of the department who came from other agencies and said we should try recruiting elsewhere. And then we had a contact with Lakeland PD, which is a rather sizable Florida police department in Central Florida. They had recently made a trip to New York and had come away with 150 applicants, and they hired 12 police officers. So based on their experience, we had detailed conversations with them. In this first experimental trip, we're sending our recruiters. We're sending a couple of officers who came from the NYPD. I don't quite understand how we do advertising on social media, but I'm being told that we're hitting all the right places that young people would hit on social media to do for advertising, and we're following exactly what Lakeland PD did, and they were very successful over a week in getting 150 people in to apply to Lakeland PD as a result. So we're kind of copying their model. I think we're going to refine this over time. And that's kind of where we are. So the answer is yes, we're going on the road. While we're on the road, we will be prepared to give the computer exam, the basic exam that everyone has to take. So if you come on to visit us, we'll send you to another room in the hotel, and you can sit down and literally take the entry exam while you're there. We'll provide all the packets for application, assist people and provide guidance on filling out the application, and we'll do all the sort of cheerleading about why Colorado is such a wonderful place to live. And you know, thanks to the support of council and with the pay raise, we're offering a we're not only offering Colorado and Aurora, we're offering a very competitive pay increase over what basic officers make in the New York City area. And we're offering the substantial relocation benefits that we have on the books right now. So I fully expect, council member, that we're going to refine this process over time. But this is kind of a leap of faith that we need to do something radically different. We've never done this before. And again, there are other areas of the country that don't offer the lifestyle and that we have here in Colorado, nor do they offer the salary and benefits that we offer. So we're hopeful that this is going to work. We'll know a lot more. We can give you a whole update at the next Public Safety Committee meeting on how this went. But we're hopeful, and I think we'll get better at the process over time.
I have one last question.
Go ahead, Councilmember Jurinsky.
So Julie Heckman, since the charter states that we only have to have 3 to 5 civil service commissioners total, would that also take a super majority then to say we just want to have 3 commissioners and we're going to remove 2? Since that's
The removal is what takes the supermajority. It is for cause or not cause that you can remove. And the charter is what says no less than 3, no more than 5 commissioners. There is a city code ordinance 10267 that does say that there are 5 commissioners, but again, ordinances can be changed by council. Many of those ordinances are simply mirroring the information that's in the charter. So the charter is what controls, and it is what says no less than 3, no more than 5.
So if I were to remove that ordinance, I would only need a simple majority, then it would go back to 3 and 2 would automatically have to be removed?
You could go to 3, and you wouldn't have to remove the ordinance. You could modify it if you'd like to have it mirror the exact language in charter to say the commission has, no less than 3, no more than 5. Oftentimes, if there's a vacancy, historically, if there's a vacancy, it's difficult to go forward with the disciplinary hearings. So having some leeway to be able to, while you're recruiting, still go ahead and have the disciplinary hearings and the other duties that the commissioners do is why having more than 3 has been helpful at times. But again, certainly up to council.
Got it. Thank you.
Sure.
Other questions on this topic?
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir. Julie, are the votes for the commission recorded anywhere? I don't think I've ever noticed them in the ruling packets that we get, or summaries rather that we get.
You mean for the disciplinary
Yes, ma'am.
hearings? The findings usually say the number of votes, whether it's unanimous or not. They do not normally include who voted which way.
Okay. And is there any way for us to get that information? Because I suspect I know why these questions are being asked.
I don't know that information is kept by the Civil Service Commission. I don't know the answer to that. We could check into that.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, Jason.
Thank you, sir. Moving on to the second section, this is where we are looking to improve our overall data collection and use some hotspot analysis. You see our crime numbers there, and then I think you're going to hear a briefing later in this meeting from the chief's office in terms of the directed action response teams. I think that is going to be a very data-driven process, and I think something that in the future is going to looking to specifically impact the numbers we're seeing here. So, but I can answer any questions you have on the information we've provided.
Questions on this one? Okay, go ahead, Jason.
Thank you. Section 3 looks at our AGRIP and youth violence. You see the numbers there from Christina Amparan and Jessica Prosser in terms of their shop. And again, open to answer any questions you may have on that one.
I guess the only question I have, and Jessica or whoever, anybody can answer this, is some of the, well, with any of the organizations that we gave grants to, I know it's very early since we just recently did this, but what is the reporting period or reporting requirements for them? Is it quarterly? Is it how often will we get back some sort of information from the various nonprofits that we fund through this program?
Good morning, council members. This is Christina Baran. For the intervention side of the funding, we'll get quarterly reports from them, although some of them are already sending me some data. For the prevention side of things, it'll be on a monthly basis.
Thank you. Any other questions for section 3?
I have one. Christina, have checks gone out to these organizations?
Has what gone out? I'm sorry.
The funding, have they received their checks, these organizations?
No. So the first step is that we have to get an updated scope of work if there was a change in funding that they received. They also received their award letter. I'm waiting to get a signed agreement from all of the organizations. Once that's received, then we will go ahead and move forward. Funding is a reimbursement agreement. And then the other thing to consider is that for those organizations that have not received any prior funding from the city, we did have to set them up to ensure that they have the necessary accounts and org numbers so they can receive funding.
Okay.
Other questions? All right, Jason, section 4.
Thanks, sir. So section 4 talks about the crisis response team. So you kind of see the numbers there in terms of that. And then also you all, as part of Michelle Crawford, the police auditor, she's going to be talking to you about her work, including her completion of the her audit on the crisis response team. And so I think that will also help us in terms of making sure that we continue to fine tune that program and are following best practices. So any questions on the crisis response team and our mental health programs?
No, and I know we have a presentation on that coming up, so I'll just let you go ahead and go to the next section.
Thanks, sir. And finally, we have the homeless camp abatements. And so you kind of see the numbers there in terms of the number of notifications and abatements conducted, and then also the number of CDOT related ones. So again, any questions related to section 5?
One question I have is that are any of the abatements being held up for lack of beds?
Councilmember Zvonek, this is Jessica Prosser. Not at this point. We continue to have the 10 beds available at Comitas, and during the summer months, the shelter is also not quite as full. So we have been able to offer shelter. It's a matter of folks taking us up on it. We have had a few over the past month or so.
Great, thanks. Any other questions? Okay, I think that concludes. Is that right, Jason? Are we finished with 4B?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That takes care of 4B, and we're ready to go on to the next slide.
Great. So 4C, PD dose. Did I say that right? And I think our outside speaker is Kathleen.
Hi, yes, that is right. PD dose, you said it correctly. Is it okay for me to share some slides?
Yep.
Okay, great. Share. I assume everyone is able to see this.
Yep.
Okay, great. So I am here on behalf of a large research network called PCARN, and Aurora Fire Rescue and Falk Ambulance are actually partners with us at Children's Hospital Colorado in this large research network. And the research network does research primarily in hospitals to look at best practices for children. But for the last 6 years, there's been some work within the out-of-hospital environment. So Aurora Fire Rescue and Falk Ambulance have actually been partners with us since 2015. And it takes a while to get research going, and it takes a while to get research funded. And so this is actually the first real prospective study that Aurora Fire Rescue will be participating in. And as part of it is complicated, it's big, and so we're kind of taking time to inform everyone in the community about this. And I think over the next few minutes, I'll explain kind of why. The study is called PDDOSE. It stands for Pediatric Dose Optimization for Seizures in EMS. So just to thank you for taking time to out of your meeting, you have a big agenda to hear this. And our goal is to inform you about the research that's taking place in the city of Aurora, and then really get your feedback. So I'm going to cover what PDDOSE is, and the big purpose of why we're doing this study is that the PDDOSE study is looking at how paramedics manage seizures in children. And there's going to be a shift from traditionally doing calculations based on weight to moving towards age. And in the next few slides, I'll talk about kind of exactly how we're planning on doing this, and some of the unique aspects of this study and why it's important to get your feedback. So number one, you're a member of a community where the PDDOSE study will take place because any child anywhere is at risk for a seizure. And for any feedback issues, our goal is to really hear directly your impression about this study. So I'm happy to take email. I'll put it in the chat so people can email me directly. I'm happy to talk by phone. I'm happy to get feedback directly during this meeting if there is time. And there's no concern or issue that we feel wouldn't be helpful to us. So just some background, because I'm talking to a group of people that work in the public safety and kind of environment. So seizures are actually a really common cause for children. In fact, it makes up about 10% of all EMS activations for children are for seizures. And a seizure is when the brain kind of like sends out a bunch of random electrical signals that keeps you from actually having control of your body and even certain life-sustaining functions such as breathing. And during seizures, patients can become unresponsive. They can stiffen up or shake. Their eyes can move abnormally, and they can even have some difficulty breathing. And seizures that don't get controlled or stop within a few minutes can actually cause brain injury. So thinking about it from the out-of-hospital environment, the PDDOSE study's goal is to decrease the number of children that actually arrive at a hospital having a seizure. And the reason for this is that a lot of kids at this time still do, about 30% of children are still seizing on arrival. So EMS agencies, most ambulances use Midazolam. And benzodiazepines can actually affect breathing. They can reduce your drive to breathe because they're kind of a general sedative for the brain. And the other key thing is that the best method for selecting the right dose is actually still not known. Everybody in the city of Aurora and the state of Colorado is aware of the legislation that was passed that was around ketamine specifically, but one key element of that legislation was that EMS had to get a weight before giving a weight-based dose of a medication. Well, all dosing of medications in children are weight-based because kids are different sizes. And so there's a lot of like tips and tricks and kind of like proxies and workarounds that we've put out in the pre-hospital environment, including the use of a length-based tape that can estimate weight and things like that. But the true way of selecting the right dose is still a question for researchers, and does impact the issue of safety in the out-of-hospital environment. And so this study will compare two methods, using a current method that involves calculations. So the standard way that we currently administer a medication for a child is we get a weight. This is true in the ER as well, or estimate a weight. And then we determine a dose based on the weight, because all dosing of medications in children is milligrams or grams per kilogram. And then you actually have to not only figure out the milligram or gram amount, but then you have to convert that to a volume to administer. And so that conversion requires calculations. Standardized dosing is something that is a little different. Standardized dosing is when kind of a one size fits all or one size fits, X range. And so you can think about using like a inhaler for asthma. There isn't different inhaler sizes for small kids versus adults. Everyone uses the same size inhaler, gets the same amount of medication when you puff it in and breathe. And so there is some role for standardized dosing if certain medications that may have what we call a wide therapeutic index, that the safety of the dose can be across a dose range that still may be effective and not unsafe to give. And so we're comparing those two methods. The medication, the midazolam in this study, is going to be given with either a spray in the nose or an intramuscular injection. We're not going to have the EMS providers pause to get IV access before giving the medication because one of our outcomes is time to delivery. So why do we need to do this study? It turns out that, as I said, about a third of children who arrive to an emergency department by EMS for seizure activity in the out-of-hospital environment are still seizing on arrival. And when some factors associated with that were explored in a multi-center study, they found that there is a real problem with dose accuracy. And more specifically, there's a certain percent of kids who got an overdose, but the large majority of children in this multi-center study got less than the appropriate dose. And that error in medication administration is about 50%. And also there's a time delay to giving the medication. So if you could imagine that your child starts to have a seizure, and then you call 911, and then it takes about 5 to 10 minutes for 911 to get to, EMS to get to your home. And then on average, it takes from that time to delivery of medication about 14 minutes. So you're already 30 minutes into the seizure. And again, as I said, the longer a seizure continues, the more difficult it is to stop. And so that is probably one of the factors associated with why a third of children with seizures in the out-of-hospital environment show up still seizing. And this is what I was explaining, that, the dosing problem is that this colored rainbow band in the center of the slide is a Brouslow tape or a length-based tape. And there are, and each little color represents like where the foot, if you like measured from the head all the way down, where the foot would land. Would the foot land in a baby in the gray area or the pink area, and a toddler in the purple, yellow area, and then for your older child and adolescent, more in the gray area. And then the length-based tape, which was developed by a team a long time ago, back in the 80s, had doses written on there, but the doses again were given in the milligram amount and not in the volume. And then again, also based on your EMS agency formulary, maybe volume is different, and you have a different concentration of X medication versus Y medication. And in the era of medication shortages that we've also dealt with in the last several years, that has been a problem. So you can see all the steps that are taken. They estimate the weight, then they figure out the amount milligram per kilogram for the medication they have to give, and then what is that dose specifically for that child, and then what's the actual volume to administer. So this can take some time. The standardized dosing, if you see here on this table, you can see that there's a range of ages across these kind of color bands. And so children grow, they don't grow that fast. And the amount of medication per age range is still within a therapeutic range. So for example, we are not going to enroll young children in the gray range because they're too little, and the causes of seizures in that group can be a little unique and not really representative of the typical seizures of children. In the pink range, the standardized dose would be no need to get, an exact weight, no need to calculate anything, no need to go through a big rigmarole. All children that are 6 to 16 months of age, who 99% of them land in the pink area on the Brouslow tape or the length-based tape, will get 1.25 milligrams, which is the equivalent of 0.25 mils. And then for the next age range up, 17 months to 5 years, any child who kind of fits in that age range will likely be in that range of colors on a length-based tape, and all of those children will get a single dose, a standard dose of 0.5 milliliter, which is 2.5 milligrams. And then, as you can see in the table, it goes slightly up over time to the oldest patients getting a total of 10 milligrams. Because the medication is administered in the nose, 10 milligrams is 2 milliliters, and we can't or kind of aerosolize more than 1 milliliter of medicine per side of the nose. So 10 milligrams is really the max, and that's actually the adult dose as well, when intranasal midazolam is given to adults to stop seizures. The conceptual model of this is that this process will kind of block and reduce issues around cognitive load for the EMS providers, need for an IV access. All these things impact a delay in administering the medication. If you're still seizing on arrival, there's a risk of neurologic morbidity. If you're still seizing on arrival, there's also a risk of respiratory failure. And those things can actually have some, higher consequences, including death. It's incredibly rare to die from a seizure, especially when EMS is involved in managing it. But it's still some prolonged seizures and then going to an ICU. And if there's any brain injury because of that, that is kind of where the risk continues. So this study that we're presenting is an NIH-funded study. It has two aims. The first aim is to compare the change in the dosing based on how we traditionally do it, as I showed, to this new standardized dose management, and see if kids are no longer seizing by the time they get to the emergency department. The study investigators hypothesized that giving a dose based on this age and kind of range of estimated weight, that they will still, that there's, because of the timing, the more rapid administration and the effectiveness of not underdosing the medication, less children will be seizing on arrival. The second aim is a safety aim, and it's to compare the frequency of respiratory failure after this change in dosing from before to after, and see if there is no higher risk of respiratory failure in children getting the standardized dose of medication. So how is this going to work here in Aurora with the families and patients in Aurora and coming to Children's Colorado? Aurora Fire will, if family calls 911 for a seizure and the child is seizing at the time the EMS is present, the EMS agency will give the medication. Well, at the start of the study, which is starting in the next month or so, the patient will get the standard dose of the traditional way that medications are administered. Over the next 4 years, at some point, it's a randomized time, there will be a switch to this more standardized dosing. But from a study procedure standpoint, any child from the start of the study through the very end, regardless of how the medication was administered, if they are seizing, EMS will administer a dose of midazolam. They will notify Children's Colorado that they are transporting a, quote, PD dose patient. On arrival to the emergency department, if the patient is still kind of confused and altered, we're actually going to apply a rapid EEG device onto the brain to see if they're still seizing. And then our care in the ED is completely routine. And then we're asking the EMS providers to provide a little bit of information about the run, and we handle how that gets done. We are not including, obviously, children who have a benzodiazepine allergy, if there's an issue that the child or adolescent could be pregnant, and then also any child with severe growth restriction, as estimated or seen by the paramedic, will also be excluded. Ultimately, kids who come in with head injury, other things, ventilator dependence, we will exclude from our analysis. That's not really relevant, but EMS will have to treat any of those children the way they would treat anybody needing a seizure. And one of the things to kind of let everyone know about is that our standard, we're going to start with the age range of 2 to 13 years. And when we determine that it's safe in that age range, then over the next couple of years, over the course of the study, we will lower the age range at which we will enroll the patients. So I think that was one of the requirements by the NIH when funding this study. There is a data safety monitoring board. So any large interventional trial such as this one, where the care is experimental, always has a data safety monitoring board who approves the protocol, reviews interim data, and advises the investigators on the safety, validity, and scientific merit of the study. And in the event that over the course of the study, we find that there's harm, the study will stop immediately. If we find that there's no harm, but the data, but it's not clear what is the, there's still some, it's not clear which method is the best, the study will continue. If, sometimes there's a winner, sometimes studies are stopped early because it's so clear there's a difference. It's not appropriate to continue to give the treatment that's clearly worse. I'm not sure that we would see that in this study, but the role of the Data Safety Monitoring Board is to really ensure that that there is very close monitoring of any enrollment of patients in a study and a stoppage of the study if there's any safety concerns that arise. So as I said, how's it going to be conducted? You can see this weird, stepwise table to the right side, and what's going to happen is that over the course of this study, all these different EMS agencies, of which 20 across the country are participating, will start enrolling patients at the start. Everybody's going to, continue their normal practice of how they administer and treat seizures. Starting and the dates are a little off there because we haven't even started our study yet, but about 6 months in to the study, there will be a randomization of to an agency to say, you are going to switch and now do the standardized dosing. The reason why not all agencies switch at the same time is because it's hard to kind of make everybody switch on a dime, number one. Number two, the agencies have to be trained. And number three, it provides a little bit of a spread across in terms of sample size of the number of children getting the conventional dosing compared to the number of children who will get the standardized dosing. And we're going to collect information on the outcomes of these children over the next 4 years. This gives a bit of a schematic geographically of who is participating in this study. And as I mentioned at the start, Aurora Fire Rescue and Falck Ambulance have been partners with Children's Colorado in this research network for the last 6 years. Many of these agencies that you see here have also been actively engaged in EMS research. And what I want to really point out is the fact that the ability for us to conduct this study really does speak to the work that Aurora Fire Rescue and their leadership have been doing over these last 5 years to be able to even participate in a study that is this big and broad in scope, and really partnering with some of the best EMS agencies across the country. The reason why I'm here talking to you today about this is because this study is something called an exception from informed consent study. And this always gets people's hackles up. And it's very understandable why, because informed consent is truly an area in research that it drives the ethics of the research that we conduct. Historically, medical research hasn't always been conducted in an ethical and fair way with patients. And so specifically like when people were experimented on without their knowledge, there's ultimately been several reports, the Belmont report and others that were drafted and written that are international to address the fact that, we need to be, as medical investigators and researchers, we must put the patient first. However, there are cases where you can't get informed consent. And the reason for this, specifically in the case of a child seizing, is that you have to treat the seizure. So as I said, normally with most studies, informed consent is obtained from the person being enrolled. In the case of children, informed consent is obtained from the parent. In children who are 7 years or over, they actually also assent. We ask their permission to be enrolled in a study. In this case, because it's a seizure, the child would be altered, and you cannot delay the management in order to get informed consent. We are going through a process through community consultation, talking with you guys about the study so that everybody is aware that this is being done and this is an exception from informed consent study. In other words, people will not consent to getting the treatment. They will consent later to whether they want their data collected, but they won't be able to consent at the time to get the treatment. So the FDA regulates exception from informed consent research. The regulations apply when patients have a life-threatening condition, which an ongoing seizure is. There is no proven treatment or available treatment is unsatisfactory. And again, it's not proven what is the best way to treat seizures in children and get the right dose in. And when it's not possible to obtain informed consent from the patient or the patient's family, specifically because there's a very short amount of time to consent. So this study clearly meets the criteria for exception from informed consent. After after the patient is treated for the seizure, parents will be notified that the child got it as a PD dose patient, whatever that means. We'll explain that. Parents will be able to choose whether they want their child to continue to participate. Again, children 17 to 13 will also choose if they want to continue to participate. And those who continue to participate will have their data collected until they're discharged from our hospital. Today, my presentation to you is part of what's called a community consultation process. A community consultation has to take place before studies presented to our review boards to be sure that we have done our due diligence in informing everyone and getting feedback from everyone, compiling that feedback, addressing concerns, and demonstrating to the review board that the study will be conducted in a manner in which all concerns raised and all issues identified are mitigated to every extent possible. I do want to just kind of share with the group the lengths and work that the Aurora Fire Rescue has done to participate in this study. It is not small. The first thing is that they applied for a certificate of federal-wide assurance. This is actually a certificate offered or given by the Department of Health and Human Services that says that you are allowed to conduct research, you are allowed to enroll patients, and you have processes and things in place that make sure that you will do that safely. The other thing that has happened is that we have been meeting for over a year in planning this study, and we have had Aurora Fire and Falck have actively participated in all aspects of this, including study-wide training and monthly group meetings. Deputy Chief Weber has undergone additional training called CITI training, which stands for Collaborative Institutional Training Initiative, and that is training in ethics, consent, research, and compliance. So again, because he is the site contact and site investigator for the City of Aurora's fire rescue agency. And so, you know, it's this extra work that he has done to participate in this. And then Aurora and Falck have a representative on the committee that's developed the training for the EMS providers across all 20 sites. And then finally, the training for the providers has been disseminated to all of the EMS providers in the agencies on their learning management system. So at really every step of the way, Aurora Fire Rescue and Falck they have really stepped up to ensure that they're going to, you know, conduct this study in a safe manner for the city and the children of Aurora. This just also shows the timeline. So the initial application of the NIH was back in June of 2019, and then it was resubmitted in October of 2020. We were notified that it was funded or would be funded by the NIH in February of 2021 and started monthly meetings shortly thereafter. The start up to this study took a full year, just in terms of coordinating the sites, figuring out the best way to get everything together. submitting a community consultation plan to the respective IRBs, getting that plan approved. We've been in our community consultation work for the last several months now, and we will be starting up, in early August. In that window between the monthly meetings and the community consultation work, we've had the application for the FWA, as I mentioned, the monthly meetings, and application to the IRB. And then also more recently, we now have EMS information flowing directly into the Children's Hospital Colorado electronic health record, which really will make some of the data collection and the safety issues very streamlined. And so there's just been a lot of work done by the agency to kind of get ready for this study. And I just want to, kind of thank the agency for their efforts and make sure that everyone on this commission understands how hard they've been working. And then this is my name and email address. And we also have a participant advocate email address as well. And I'm happy to take any questions. I did send these slides to the group at large because this actually has a YouTube video that anybody is able to watch. It's about 5 minutes long that really goes into some nice detail about the study, many of the things I've covered here, but it can also be disseminated to a wider audience for anyone else who may be interested. And that's all I have. I don't know if I went over my time, and I'm happy, as I said, to take questions
I have a question. I have a question.
yeah.
Great, thanks. Basically, what I want to know is, you said that in the study, if you find harm, then you will adjust some things. What I want to know that there is absolute protection for Aurora firefighters. Should there be harm? Should anything go wrong with one of these doses? I'm not sure that's a question for you necessarily. Maybe it is for one of the city attorneys. I want to know that without a doubt, there is protection for Aurora firefighters administering this dose.
So again, the thing I will say overall is that, and just to kind of explain to you and the group as a whole, our study, as it's being conducted, is being done across 20 sites across the country. We have interviewed 10 families to receive their feedback locally. We have done surveys with 100 families locally. There are a total of 2,000 interviews across the country among family members to express their concerns. We brought this to the Human Relations Board and explained kind of the rationale around that and addressed their concerns and questions. We brought it to the Immigrant and Refugee Committee also to address their concerns and questions. The overall what will be difficult to determine, and in the protection issue for Aurora Fire Rescue, which I completely understand the concern about, is that failing to treat a seizure, it can result in respiratory depression, and that risk is much higher than treating a seizure, even in this range of dosing.
You're not asking my question. Is there protection for Aurora firefighters? I understand 20 different agencies. I care about Aurora firefighters the most.
Sure.
So if there's protection, should something go wrong in one of the, if an Aurora firefighter administers this dose and there is harm, there was harm to be found, something like that in this study, are those Aurora firefighters protected? I really need a direct answer here. And like I said, that may not be one for you. That may be one for our city attorney's office.
So I'll ask Angela to speak to that, because Angela was involved in the federal-wide assurance application and the other things. But in my understanding and belief is that yes, they're protected. But Angela, I don't know if you have anything to add in that regard.
Good morning, council members. Councilmember Jurinsky, I don't have that answer off the top of my head. I will certainly get an answer for you and get that back to you.
Yeah, I need that before I can wholeheartedly get behind something like this and have Aurora firefighters out there. I understand that this is something that could save children's lives, and I want to be all in. I want to be very supportive. But if there is the chance that even one Aurora firefighter may lose their career or worse over administering one of these doses, and harm comes from it, I stand with the firefighters.
So Councilmember Jurinsky, this is Deputy Chief Weber. Can I what I'd like to tell you is that this will be a change to our protocol. So our members will be following a protocol. So currently, right now, they follow a protocol for seizure studies for children. If they follow that protocol and something bad happens, you know, they have that they have that defense that, hey, I followed the protocol, I did what I was supposed to do. So that's the same way with this protocol is going to be changed. It's going to be in writing. It's just a different, we're just changing our protocol, and we change our protocol. The EMS protocols get changed quite often. So, I mean, our defense is we followed the protocol. So,
and also trained on the protocol too.
Yep.
I mean, I think to be clear, all processes, you know, from top to bottom are the standard practice of the EMS agency and the providers that work there.
So Chief Weber, you are in support of this?
most definitely.
Okay, thank you. That's really what I needed.
Okay.
Other questions? Okay, thank you, Kathleen. Next up,
Your time.
item 4D, police auditor report. Michelle.
Good morning. Can I please have the ability to share? All right, you should now be seeing my presentation. So good morning. I'm going to be here this morning to give you my second quarter update. The updates include the body-worn camera compliance audit. Part 1 is currently underway, and the crisis response team audit was completed in June, and I'm going to be giving you an overview of that audit next. The crisis response team follows the co-responder model that pairs a clinician with an officer. The co-responder model helps prevent unnecessary incarceration and hospitalization and helps to reduce patrol officer resources spent on mental health situations. The audit objectives were to determine if the crisis response team is effectively receiving and responding to incidents involving people with mental health or other specialized needs, and to evaluate if resources staffing CRT are adequate to respond to mental health calls. Based on the results of our engagement procedures, additional data is needed to determine the effectiveness of receiving and responding to incidents and the adequacy of CRT staffing resources. The city lacks formal procedures for handling calls for persons in crisis and dispatching CRT and CIT or crisis intervention trained officers. If Aurora 911 receives a call requesting a CIT or a CRT officer, they'll air that request over the radio and then dispatch a patrol officer. CRT are listening for those calls and watching as they come through the system to see if it's something they could respond to. There's several leading practices that are not being followed regarding receipt of incidents, including procedures for receiving and dispatching calls involving persons in crisis, a policy describing the call taker's role in gathering mental health information from the caller, procedures if CRT or a CAT officer is not available for a crisis event, and transferring to a crisis line as appropriate. We recommend Aurora 911 follows leading practices, including developing training for employees handling mental health crisis calls, developing procedures for identifying and handling mental health crisis calls, working with CRT to develop procedures for dispatching CRT and CIT trained officers, and evaluating the use of a crisis line. There's no mental health calls for service data for across the city. The current computer-aided dispatch or CAD system does not have a category code for mental health related calls as they are received. Officers can use a mental health crisis as a final category, but it's not consistently used and the department lacks training on its use. In addition, that final call category only allows one category for a call. So if there's other factors such as a criminal element like a domestic disturbance or trespass, the mental health crisis category may not be appropriate as the final category. To better understand what data did exist and to look at a snapshot of calls, we selected 1 week randomly to look at calls for service. Using call categories, we narrowed down that to around 1,800 calls for service. then reviewed those call remarks for each call and identified calls where someone was in crisis and CRT could have responded to. Of the 117 calls where someone was in crisis that could have had a CRT response, we documented in the appendix the categorization of those calls from the CAD system and from the final category. Improved tracking of mental health related calls and data will help improve the deployment of crisis response resources. We recommend Aurora Police work with information technology and Aurora 911 to identify and implement the most efficient and effective methods to collect mental health calls for service data. We also recommend that APD uses the mental health calls for service data to ensure the appropriate deployment of resources to persons in crisis once they have access to that information. There's additional opportunities to gather data in accordance with leading practices. Some data sets we identified as missing included the number of mental health calls for service, repeat mental health calls for service, which CRT is beginning to track, calls transferred to a crisis line, and the number of mental health calls to which a CIT officer was available and responded. We recommend that APD tracks the additional data points identified in the audit. There is no memorandum of understanding in place with our partner agency. The intergovernmental agreement in place for grant funds did not include the number of clinicians for the program, only a dollar amount for personnel. Based on this, we could not determine baseline clinician staffing levels for the program. The crisis response team positions include a program manager, case manager, clinicians, a CRT sergeant, and CRT officers. Using data provided by city staff, we graphed out the staffing levels from 2018 when the program started through first quarter 2022. The program manager, case manager, and clinician positions have not been consistently staffed throughout the program. The graphic you're looking at, the blue line towards the top is the officer staffing level, the purple line is clinicians. As you can see, there's never been a 1-to-1 ratio of clinicians to officers for the program. We researched various staffing models in use for clinicians for co-responder teams across Colorado and identified 3 different models. The first is to partner with a mental or a behavioral health agency. The partner agency controls pay and benefits, and the flexibility to adjust that varies by agency. Partner agency is responsible for managing the employees, clinical oversight, supervision, support, maintaining health records, and it allows clinicians access to that agency's records. The next model is to hire a city employees where the city would control pay and benefits. City would be responsible for those same areas, including direct supervision. They'd have to evaluate insurance coverage, legal expertise, and getting an electronic health system and clinical oversight. Clinicians would likely lose access to partner agency records. The third model was to partner with a different provider. The provider would control pay and benefits, which may allow flexibility. The provider would be responsible for those same areas, including clinical oversight, supervision, and maintaining health records. The clinicians, again, would likely lose access to partner agency records. The grant funding for this program ends this year. Without adequate clinician and case manager staffing, this program becomes a CIT program and not a co-responder program. We recommend that the city issues a request for information or a request for proposals to evaluate staffing options for clinicians and a case manager, and then determines which option or partner best serves the city's and the community's needs. APD lacks strong policies around persons in crisis, including governing interactions with individuals with mental health disorders, procedures for the crisis response team, and procedures for CIT trained officers. Currently, there are no standard operating procedures for the crisis response team in effect. We did review some draft SOPs during the engagement. This chart documents our review of leading practices and the current policies in place and where APD met, partially met, or did not meet leading practices. Areas that did not meet leading practices included CRT policies, performance measures, resources, officer selections, calls for service, actions, restraint, and transfer of care. We recommend that APD develops SOPs that include leading practices for the CRT in cooperation with clinicians and updates its directives to reflect leading practices. We also recommend developing a CIT steering committee that incorporates leading practices identified in the audit, and that APD works with internal and external partners to identify additional methods for collecting feedback and raising awareness for this program. That concludes my presentation. Are there any questions?
Michelle, thank you so much. I really appreciate the work that you and your team do. I have to admit that every time I hear one of your presentations, I feel like I age a little bit. The last two, the one from the first quarter, dealing with the records management issue, which ended up being a bigger issue, and now this. I'm a big believer that this program is necessary and has so much potential, and there's a lot of what you just presented is disheartening, and what I'm going to open it up to some questions, but in August, and this is for Jason and et al., when we go through the Aurora action plan, the fourth item, which deals with the CRT program, what I'd like to do is make sure that we are addressing what we are doing to remedy the issues that were just pointed out by Michelle. And I know that we've had some conversations about data collection. That's also a part of the Aurora action plan, and having a system that's not so antiquated that we can't capture the appropriate data to determine whether or not a program is successful or not. We're talking about funding, making funding decisions, and I'm a big believer we need to have the data necessary. So that's for Jason, but I'm going to open it up for questions to my colleagues before I ask any of mine. So council members Jurinsky or Sundberg.
I would just say that this is particularly relevant as it's part of the action plan. And I would ask Michelle if there are any municipalities out there, jurisdictions that have really set a good tone with this and a good model that we could help emulate.
What I found in my research is kind of every jurisdiction's doing something slightly different. I think there's the ability as, CRT, they begin to work with other jurisdictions and have those bigger conversations to kind of leverage what's working well in those other areas and to incorporate that back in. But I don't know that there's one specific model. Everything is kind of tailored to each jurisdiction, is a little bit unique for each program. But I believe as they start to, the state's Office of Behavioral Health, I believe, is starting to do some work in this area as well. So as they expand, I think there's an opportunity to leverage that information and figure out how to best apply it to Aurora to make our program even better.
Thank you.
Other questions for Michelle? My question then, I guess, is really for Jason. Jason, is Michelle went through this and she talked about the practices not followed, some of the challenges with data collection. And again, I know you and I've had some offline conversations about different systems there. Do you believe that that there are steps being taken to address these shortcomings? And then second part of that question is, can we have a presentation by August ready for us to go through that and really focus our update on the Aurora action plan on this? And I really think it covers obviously the second item in the Aurora action plan, the data collection, but also this one.
No, absolutely. So that's why I think a few things. So Michelle's work, this is why Michelle's work is so important. As she said, the work that's out there, everybody does a little bit differently. And I think as a reminder, kind of Aurora started this a few years ago. I think her audit does a good kind of historical of how this was initially stood up, and I think the department had every intention of doing this right. They stood it up, and I think the audit now comes at a very important time because, as she noted, the grant funding is ending, and I think there is a large recognition of the importance of these programs, as you all have noted. So we are using her audit really as our guide, our kind of guiding document going forward. So we both Sergeant Bunch and Courtney Tassin have already taken this and are well into implementing these things. And so they've started looking at SOPs, they've started looking at data collections, and then we're also using this as we develop the 2023 budget. So we're going to be moving off of grant funding to having the program funded in the general fund, and then part of that is also going to be include a position that's specifically focused on data and data collection, data analysis, and again, making sure that we're getting that portion of this right. So those are already underway. So we're happy to report on that progress and kind of give you an update on that. And then the other important thing that Michelle touched on is this all starts with a call to 911. And so I know that Tina and her team, as you saw in their response, fully agree and fully support the recommendations. Again, I think the timing of the report is very fortuitous, and it's the right time. We are very close to implementing our new computer-aided dispatch system. And so as we get that up online, we then need to look at how we're taking those calls, how we're categorizing those calls, how we're dispatching those calls. And so it is absolutely something that 911 has on their list to do. They're excited for that work. And then the other reason that the timing is fortuitous is that we were successful in getting a grant for a nurse navigation line. So we all know that a lot of the calls that come in to the dispatch center are medical related, particularly when it comes to calls for AFR service. And so we were able to get a grant. Tina is working with that grant provider to stand up a nurse navigation line, so we could possibly divert some calls and not have to dispatch or adjust how we dispatch medical resources, because there are some calls where if the caller could talk to a nurse, talk to a medical professional, we may be able to either not have a response or adjust our response. And so I say the nurse navigation line because, as Michelle noted in her audit, that crisis intervention line is a very close corollary of that. So again, when can we divert responses and perhaps get folks in touch with other mental health providers? And so as we're rolling out our protocols for the nurse navigation line, we are thinking about, well, what does a crisis intervention line work with? So I think, again, clearly lots of work to do. But again, I think the timing on Michelle's audit and just a number of different things, the CAD implementation, the budget, are really coming together nicely. And I think we are, happy to come back in August. I know, again, Jake and Courtney are already working on an RFP process. So we're happy to come back next month. And with that, I know probably both Jake and Courtney and Tina are all on. So for the team, anything to add to my ramblings?
Sorry, my computer.
Good morning, everyone. This is Tina Bonetta. And thank you, Jason. I think you captured that very well. I would also like to add that in the midst of all of the other changes that are occurring, not only in the city of Aurora, but nationwide, July 16th is the launch date officially for essentially the 911 of mental health, which is the new 988 number implementation. And I think that with that implementation also, that we may see a lot of calls that have historically come into 911 potentially also be diverted to the 988 crisis line. And so we're just going to wait for that implementation as well to see how that rollout impacts the number of calls and the types of calls that are coming into our center.
And DC Ambassador, I'd also like to add thank you for all the sentiment. Jake, Sergeant Bunch and I have been working on the SOPs, the RFP process. The scope of work has been completed, and now we're about to send out that purchase requisition after some approval all the way up the chain there. So there's been a lot of effort. We have begun our CIT steering committee with a bunch of different providers across the Aurora area, as well as looking for individuals who've actively engaged either with our crisis teams or with the behavioral health system to help follow best practices, but also stay in line with what the people truly want out of these programs. So we're very thankful for the audit. Michelle was wonderful, and she actually brought to light a lot of things that we need to implement or that we have been implementing but just never wrote down. So we're very thankful for Michelle and the audit process and just the entire city staff for their support on this.
Anything else or other questions on item 4D? Okay, thank you all. Appreciate the update. Last item on the agenda is 4E, Direct Action Response Team. And I don't know if this is going to be Chief Oates or Division Chief Lanigan, but whoever is going to lead the discussion, take it away.
I'll make some introductory comments and then hand it off to Chief Lanigan. we've decided that given the challenges and the increase in crime around non-fatal shootings, robberies, and motor vehicle theft, that there's a need to create a proactive effort that's targeted at areas and times of day where these crimes are occurring. The Direct Action Response Team, or DART teams, is a concept the organization's familiar with. We used to have small teams that worked out of each of the 3 districts, basically a sergeant and 6 officers. As the committee knows, staffing in the department is very tight, but we did manage to cull through the organization and come up with enough personnel to staff a team of a lieutenant, 2 sergeants, 12 police officers, and 2 detectives. That team is in training. Division Chief Lanigan can talk a little bit about the training, but we hope to unveil the team as a working force out on the street beginning later this month. They would work Wednesdays through Saturdays tentatively in the evening hours when we have our biggest challenges around crime. And the whole point is to do smart policing targeted at the persons involved in violent crime. The reason there's a focus on motor vehicle theft is really 2 reasons. One is it's a very important issue in the community. We've heard it from all different quarters. But number 2, and maybe the more compelling argument, is we are finding that disproportionately the people that we do arrest and the crimes that do occur, the more violent crimes like robbery and non-fatal shootings, there's usually a stolen car attached to some aspect of that crime, typically some of the folks involved in the bad behavior. And by the way, it's not that we're not taking homicide, gun violence that leads to homicide seriously. It's just that we have a very rigorous response to homicides already with our major crimes unit. So this team is a proactive street team that's going out to deal with these issues and focusing on non-fatal shootings because that's such an important bellwether crime in the city. And with that, I'll hand it off to Division Chief Lanigan to do the presentation. Thank you.
Hello, thank you, council members. If I can get presenter mode. Still not getting it. Well, I think you all have it in front of you, so I'll just kind of go through it. For whatever reason, I'm not getting presenter mode. So the direct action response team, like the chief said, started years ago, and we eliminated that team under Chief Metz to go to a large SWAT team, and now we've looked back and realized that the chief and the district commanders need a team to go out there and specifically start addressing violent crime. So going on to the second page, so we've got our missions, our goals, our functions, our tools, our operations, and our logistics. And I'll just start off with the mission. And the DART mission is to impact violent crime through investigative enforcement efforts, targeting established patterns of crime trends, known hotspots based on intelligence-driven analytical data. And that's going to be really the biggest part of this is these teams are going to be going out using the data given by the crime analysts on a daily basis. They're going to use conventional specialized law enforcement methods. DART members will engage in highly visible, proactive, investigative enforcement operations to combat the rising violent crime of motor vehicle thefts in the city of Aurora. So their mission every day is going to be driven by analytical data. We're going to use technology, and there it is. So I was just told I have presenter mode now. Can you see it now?
No, not yet.
Okay, now we can see it.
There we go.
Okay, sorry about that. So that's our mission. Our goals to locate and identify and disrupt major criminal activity contributing to violent crime, to include motor vehicle thefts, illegal firearm purchases, drug-related offenses, prostitution, and most importantly, just the shootings that are happening in the city, the violent crime. We want to collaborate with the community members, business owners, key stakeholders to identify and understand the contributing factors, violent crime, and the central figures responsible for that. To establish an effective working model to have immediate and lasting impact on violent crime, to reverse the increasing trend of reported violent crime, and to reduce the annual number of victims of violent crime. Our proactive functions are going to be to target known hotspots, establish pattern crime trends, and known criminal offenders based on intelligence-driven analytical data. Individuals engaged in violent crime or other high-risk criminal activity. We're going to pay specific attention to those people that we know are out there doing violent crime. We want to go after those repeat habitual criminal offenders, suspected gang affiliation, and criminals targeting victims of opportunity. Known and prolific criminal offenders engaged in motor vehicle theft. Those are those patterns that we see out there. We know that right now we're sitting at about 3,700 victims of auto theft. And we know that we don't have 3,700 different people stealing cars, and we know we don't have one person doing all of them. But we need to go after that group of people out there that we know are a pattern or a group that are just stealing cars in Aurora. And we want to use priority-based formal and informal joint operations with our detectives to target those high-level offenders. So then we also have our reactive functions. These officers are still going to be out there every day doing somewhat police work. If they're in the area of a violent crime, they're going to show up to those. So they're going to show up to those active critical incidents. If they're in the area, of course, they have to show up to the natural disasters, civil disorders, stuff like that. But really, they're there to provide that immediate aid to patrol on high priority calls for service and major events. We're going to saturate areas, give perimeter support, roving support, and authorize pursuits for forcible terminations when we find those violent criminals. They're going to be there to assist with crime scene management, crowd control, when and if that's necessary. That's not going to be their primary goal. Suspect apprehension, sequestering and interviewing of victims and witnesses. We found that after these violent crimes happen, it's best to get to those victims and witnesses quickly so we can get that information out. And then the application of technical skills when we deploy star chase deployment, investigative database searches, and utilizing our mesh cameras and our license plate readers that we have around the city. And then, of course, the informal management of community members, business owners, and key stakeholders in the resolution of major criminal events. And then we got the investigation and enforcement component of this. They're going to do a lot of surveillance. We're putting them all out in unmarked cars. It won't look like a police car. It'll look like any other car out there. And the immediate uniform enforcement operations that they'll be able to jump out and do. They'll have rapid deployment, high visibility enforcement out in those high crime areas. They're going to have those directed enforcement operations driven by analytical data. The joint operations with our GRIT, our Raven, and our interagency groups such as narcotics and gangs. They're going to be starting to do the basic investigation of all these violent crimes. And then they'll also have the SWAT tactical support element, because we are moving some of our SWAT officers over to this team to fulfill the whole staffing mechanism. And then they'll be there for a patrol operation resource and a uniform support on select planned operations. So the strategic operations. So our license plate reader enforcement, our motor vehicle thefts, and our arrest warrants, they're going to be really good at that. Traffic stops. When we see an undercover officer sees a crime being committed, or we believe a crime was committed, these officers will be there to do those, what we call a wall stop, is trying to confirm what an undercover officer might have seen. They're going to be out in the community doing pedestrian contracts in those high crime areas, knock and talks in those areas where we believe that those suspects may be going or living. A foot patrol may be in those areas of those high crime bar checks, and then dealing with our special investigation units such as narcs, gangs, SWAT, to do drug and prostitution operations. So the logistics of the team, they're going to work a 10-hour day, Wednesday through Saturday. The work schedule and their times, right now we have them at a 2 o'clock to midnight. That will change on a weekly basis. If we see the crime trends moving earlier or later, they'll move to those times. They'll maintain flexibility with those hours as operational needs and crime trends come around. Those supervising officers can respond to high priority calls for service and make those initial assessments of those crime scenes and the notifications of our grit detectives. The DART supervisors can direct those preliminary investigations. So we can start the focusing on trying to find those suspects as quick as we can. Those DART officers can provide those investigatory support and high priority calls in the form of surveillance and enforcement or outstanding fugitives. And then our approach will be to provide those budgetary reliefs to the department by reducing the number of grit call outs. So right now, every time there's a gang or robbery investigation, our grit detectives are going out. Our hope is that now that we have this team out there, they can try to supplement some of those call outs so we're not having to call out our detectives all the time. And then to further promote those collaborative efforts between the members of our ISS group and potentially reduce those overtime expenditures there to try to stay fiscally responsible. So right now we know this is a pilot program with 2 identical teams. And as you'll see, each team will have a sergeant, an investigator or a detective, and then 6 officers. They'll be readily identifiable wearing a BDU type uniform, and there'll be 2 officers per vehicle. So with that, that takes me to the end of that presentation. I'm sure there's going to be some questions about the team and how it's going to be used. So with that, I'll be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee for either Chief Oates or Chief Lanigan?
I have a question, Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, go ahead.
And this might blend in more towards the miscellaneous matters, but maybe there's some affiliation. Is the shot spotter technology viable to the department and in your efforts here? Any more thoughts on that technology?
Councilmember, this came up at the last meeting of the committee, and the challenge with ShotSpotter is it's very expensive, and we're in the process of doing an analysis. We think in terms of bang for the buck, cameras and more cameras and license plate readers around the city, and particularly in areas where we're challenged with violent crime, is likely a better expenditure. I've asked our team to come up with a plan and cost out a plan to layer more cameras and license plate readers in key areas around the city, but also to take a look at the equivalent coverage with ShotSpotter. I have a preference for cameras and license plate readers based on my experience in other places in which I've worked and having a feel for the areas of Aurora that we would be most concerned about. So I hope to be coming up with a plan soon on that. But ShotSpotter is not off the table, but we all need to understand ShotSpotter is very, very expensive.
Okay, thank you. And just a tie-in question. A resident recently asked me a question of going after expired license tags, registration on vehicles. Any update on that, or is this tie into the direct action response team as well?
I think I'll let Jed speak to that.
Yeah, I can answer that. The Traffic Bureau also falls under me. And unfortunately, under the pandemic, the Department of Motor Vehicle basically shut down for a period of time, and license plates weren't being renewed. That has since, we know that has since changed, and the DMV is back up and running fully. We have just recently sent out direction again to our officers that we need to start enforcing those license plates and giving tickets back out on expired license plates. This will not be a direction for this team. This team is going to be out there to address violent crime. Not to say that if they need to be able to stop a car and use that as a reason to stop a car, that they might use that. But This team is not going to be out there to specifically be taking care of expired license plates. Our traffic bureau and our patrol officers have been given direction to start enforcing those expired plates when and if they can.
Okay, and just to say, I appreciate the specific targeted approach to what you're doing here. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Any other questions, Councilmember Sundberg?
No.
No, you're good. Okay. I don't have any questions. I just one comment, both Chief Oates and Chief Lanigan. I just want to say thank you for putting this team together. As you've heard me say a number of times, that there is no greater concern to our residents than improving public safety. And I recognize the staffing challenges that the department's had and continues to have, hopefully to a lesser and lesser extent as time goes on. But nonetheless, I think this very targeted and intentional focus on the crimes that are impacting our residents the most is exactly what we've needed. And when we talk about the importance of building trust in the community, a lot of that is making sure that the police department is capable of responding to crime. And so that's exactly what I believe that this new unit will do. And just want to say thank you for bringing it forward. And please, and I know you both heard me say this, don't hesitate to let us know if there are things that you need from us on council to help you all be successful, because your success is the success of our city and of our residents. So again, thanks for bringing this forward.
Thank you.
Other questions, comments? If not, we will confirm the next meeting, I believe is August 11th, same time, 8:30 a.m. We'll see you all then. Meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.